Hello watercolor lovers, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impression. A lot of people and artists seem to enjoy my foggy painting, so I thought it would be nice to do a rainy painting. This reference was taken at Old Montreal, which is outside Toronto. It has quite a lot of European buildings, and it also rained on that day, so I thought it would be nice to capture that rainy mood. Before we get on to it, hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. As you guys know, I always provide the drawing template and reference. You guys can find the links in the description, and please feel free to download it. In any watercolors, you start with the lightest value first. Even though the colors are neutral in the reference, I want to have a little bit of color variation in my sky, so I add a little bit of cobalt blue in it. As soon as it comes to the ground, I'm going to introduce a little bit of Winsor violet, and I'm also going to add a little bit of warmth in it as well. So this creates a glow in our distance. So I'm going to take it the sky all the way to the ground. Being said that, I'm also aware of the people as well as this light post which is on the left hand side. So I'm leaving some highlights here and there, and I'm painting all over it. But as it comes to the ground, if you can see in the reference, when you squint your eyes, you can see the value of the ground is lighter than our sky. So I'm going to have a lot of water in my brush, and I'm going to keep it really light. But as it comes to the foreground, I'm going to add a little bit of a darker pigment. I'm using a little bit of NeutralTint in it, so that it kind of gives the illusion of lead-in for us. And I also went ahead and finished the first wash. For the buildings especially, I used raw amber and a little bit of NeutralTint in it. So now let's jump onto the trees, which is on the left hand side. So for mixing for the trees, I'm using Cadmium Yellow and Cerulean Blue, and I also a little bit of Viridian in it, because I'm just going to try to add the lighter value first, then we can add the darker value as it comes down. But I'm also being aware of the umbrella, the person who is in the umbrella in the foreground. So I'm making sure not to go over it. And you can also see that as it comes down, I'm using clean water in the background. So now when I paint on it, I get this illusion of loose edges in the background. So it also creates an illusion of depth in our painting as well. Once we're done with it, and now let's introduce a little bit of darker values for our trees. But when you see in the reference, the darker values are usually on the mid part of our painting. So it's usually at the bottom of the trees. So I'm kind of for the darker values, I'm using NeutralTint, and I also add a little bit of burnt amber here and there, and I also use French Ultramarine blue as well. So it kind of have a lot of color variation in our trees as well. I've seen a lot of watercolor paintings, when they paint trees, they only have 2 colors or 3 colors. It's better to mix a lot of different colors in your trees, because as it dries out, it gives a beautiful color variation in our painting. And there's also a car which is in the foreground. I'm making sure to leave some highlights for it. And now what I'm doing is I took burnt amber and a little bit of French ultramarine blue, and I started adding the bottom details for it as well. Okay, let's focus on adding details for our major figure. So in every painting, you have to come up with a major figure, because he is a really focal point for us. Even though in our reference, the person is standing facing other side, I thought it would be nice to add a person who is going into the painting. So you also create as a lead-in for our painting as well. I'm also creating a little bit of color variation in him as well. So for his arms, I used Cobalt Turquoise. That's one of my favorite colors, so I kind of added that there. So now let's add some darker values for awnings. So there are like 2 awnings or 3 awnings in there, so I want to add that details as well. And there's also signboards for the shops, so I'm also making sure not to go over it. And there's also a small step which is in front of the store. I'm also adding that as well. And there's also a person who is standing on it. So I'm making sure not to overdo it, because I don't want any other figures in our painting to read as much as our major figure. And now I'm focusing on the details on the signage board which is in front of the shop, and I'm also trying to connect that in the shop as well. So I add a little bit of marks here and there for the stairs, and let's jump onto the car and give some love for it. So for the car glasses, I'm just using NeutralTint, and I'm just adding some glasses. I usually, whenever I add cars, I usually have odd numbers, but since they're one of the car which is in distance, so it's going to be a mere shape, so I added 4 cars in it. And the reason being, I added the car which is on the left hand side. It also helps us to frame our major figure with an umbrella. So I want some kind of darker shape there, so it kind of helped me doing that. So now in the distance, the background, which is super white, so I'm kind of adding a little bit of marks here and there to add some reflections after once we finish the second wash of our painting. Now let's add some details for our painting. So this lamps which exist in the reference, looks pretty cool and really big in real world. So I'm also making sure to add that, because this also helps us to create perspective in our painting. And there's also a little bit of value inside the lamp, so I'm going to do it. There's a lot of details that exist in the lamp, but I'm just going to create an impression of it. Even for the signage, there's also darker value in it, so I'm also adding that as well. So when I squint my eyes, I also notice that there's a darker value underneath the awning. Even though in reality in the reference there is no red awning in the reference, so I thought it'd be nice to add some kind of colors in our painting as well. So I added a red awning as well as a blue awning, and I'm also making sure when it goes to the foreground that red is lighter, because things that exist in the foreground have brighter value than things go in the background. So now I'm taking a neutral tint, a little bit of burnt amber in my brush. Whenever I do details, I make sure I do it in dry brush, because dry brush usually tends to hold on to the value. Now let's add some reflections on the ground. So adding reflection is a quite easy process. So I use clean water wherever the car sits, and I introduce darker value and let the watercolor does what it needs to be done. Because that's a beautiful thing in watercolors. Creating reflection is super easy in watercolors. Sometimes the colors stick at one place, so what I will do is I use clean water and clean brush, and I blend it and I create a beautiful transition from the midground to the foreground. So I'm using the same technique for the person who is in the foreground as well. So I want to make sure that he gets a more darker value than the midground and in the background. And you can also see the trees also reflecting on the ground. I'm also adding that as well. Now let's add reflection in the foreground. So I used clean water in the foreground. So now when I paint reflection from the midground to the foreground, I'll get blurry edges in the foreground. So that also gives a beautiful illusion of depth as well. So I'm making sure to add that. And I also want to make sure that the reflections that are happening in the foreground have darker value. So now it's a matter of squinting my eyes and adding darker pigments here and there. And I'm also adding darker pigments in the foreground reflection as well. So the poles which is in the midground to the foreground, so I want that to be reflecting on the ground as well, and it is also in the reference, so I want to make sure to add that. And as it comes to the foreground, I also use clean water to create that blurry detail for the pole. There's also 4 people walking in the midground, and I also want that reflection on the ground as well, but I will keep it to minimal. And there's also details which is in the foreground, the lamps which is for the signage board. Since I have the darker pigment in my brush, so I also added that on the reflection. So now once I'm happy with it, now let's add some lights for the car. For the car, I'm using cadmium red and a little bit of Chinese white in it, gouache after it dries out. And the person in the foreground, he dried out quite a bit and the value kind of went all down. So I just glazed over it again so that he comes to the foreground as well. So for that, I'm using burnt amber and a little bit of neutral tint in it, and also add a little bit of French ultramarine blue as. Now it's a matter of bringing back eyelets in our painting, and we are almost at the end of our painting. So I'm taking white paint and bringing some details on the awning in the front, and there's also some eyelets for in the lamp as well. I'm adding that. So as soon as I added that, you could see there's separation happen between the awning and the foreground. So whenever I do this process, I make sure that I don't overdo it. A lot of beginners and a lot of watercolorists, tend to go overboard with it. Personally, I do it, so I recommend not to go overboard with it as well. And I'm squinting my eyes, seeing where the eyelets are, and I'm adding some eyelets for the car and the person in the foreground. There's also some eyelets happening on the light post, which is on the left hand side, and I'm making sure that I'm adding it. Being said that when I added eyelets for the light post, I'm also making sure that I'm aware of my perspective as well. and I thought it would be nice to have some license plate on the car which is in the foreground, and values here and there, and that's it folks, and we are end of our painting journey. If you are an artist or a person who enjoys moody paintings, I created a playlist especially for you guys. Please feel free to check it out. Thanks again for watching this rainy painting in watercolors. Let me know what you learned from this video and what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, let me know in the comments or write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting folks.